This video is all about painting a really cool sci-fi concept, and I'm going to show you exactly how to create it step by step. My name is Victor, I work as a concept artist, so let's go ahead and jump into the process. Whenever you're starting a painting like this, you first want to identify your horizon line. You want to know where your camera sits and what your viewer will see right away. Once you have that, you can begin with a simple line work sketch and don't overthink it. Think of it like placing basic building blocks. I'm just breaking down the main shapes, figuring out where everything belongs, and trying to build a story piece by piece. So let's try to work a bit on the storytelling. We can place an astronaut, for example, here, because I want it to feel like he just crash landed and he's exploring the new environment. He's trying to figure out what kind of world he stepped into. And your sketch doesn't have to be perfect or detailed at this stage. It just needs to help you understand where your painting is going. That's all you're aiming for right now. This time we'll be painting entirely in grayscale first, which is incredibly useful if you don't want to worry about color in the beginning. And if you've never done grayscale first painting, stick with me, because later on I'll show you how easy it is to turn it into a full color image. Some artists might get nervous at this stage, but once you see how the color applies, it's very easy to understand the whole process. Now let's try establishing the major shapes. I'm beginning with this big mushroom-like vegetation in the middle ground, so don't stress too much about perfect values yet. Nothing is balanced at this point, especially since you have like this huge white background. Just block your elements in. We'll adjust everything later. In the background, we have some very simple shapes, tall structures, soft silhouettes, and repeating forms that hint at perspective. For a sci-fi alien environment like this, exaggeration really helps. Try to push the proportions, mix medium, large, and smaller shapes, and of course try to do that in an interesting way. And experiment with the layout, play with the focal point, and don't worry too much about being accurate yet. This is your chance to explore. It's also a good moment to check your scale. I'm duplicating these mushroom shapes and placing them further into the background. As they shrink and fade back, they help reinforce the sense of depth and make the world feel big enough for our astronaut. And by the way, this technique and many others is inside the Digital Painting Mastery program, a complete system that gives you step-by-step training designed to help you make real, visible progress fast. You'll get lectures, demos, homework assignments, and homework breakdowns so you can build confidence and develop real artistic skill. There's currently a 50% discount and extra bonuses before the start date, so now's the best time to jump in. Check the link in the description. Alright, moving on. Scale cues, by the way, it's one of the easiest ways to make a scene feel believable. To make it even more alien, I'm adding some flying creatures in the distance. This helps sell the idea that the world is alive and active. Later on, I'll push them even further back and play with their proportion again. This subtle movement in the sky will make the final image feel more dynamic. Now, once the shapes are blocked in, it's time to start describing the form. We'll begin with the middle ground shapes and think about how the light falls on them. Use whatever brush feels comfortable. Think about what material these objects might be made of. Do they feel soft, rubbery, smooth, or anything like that? Reference images can help a lot here. When in doubt, you can look up real mushrooms, coral, volcanic rock, anything organic and unusual will help. Now we'll start giving each object some structure. So I'm shading the forms, carving out planes, and hinting at the way light interacts with these shapes. In this case, fog is really important here and helpful. I'm adding fog to separate the layers, soften the transitions, and support the sense of scale. And as you work, make it a habit to zoom out often, take a step back mentally, look at the whole picture, ask yourself, is the composition still readable? Are the values working together? This habit will save you a lot of frustration later on if you find some issues with your painting. Now, keep refining the values, push the lights, pull the darks, build the transitions. You don't have to rush, stay in grayscale as long as you need. This stage is where the foundations are built, so the more clarity you get here, the easier the coloring process will be. Now you can move on to the astronaut and give him a quick shadow pass. Nothing too detailed, just enough to place him in the environment and give him some volume. Later we'll add color and a few extra details, but for now simple shapes are fine. To emphasize how humid and foggy this alien world is, I'm adding another layer of thick fog between the middle ground and the large vegetation. This helps the lighting feel more atmospheric and you can make the world feel heavier and more alive. And now that the values are working, let's move on to adding some color. Now, this part is surprisingly simple. All you have to do is lock the layer you want to paint on and switch your brush to color mode. and then just glaze color directly over the grayscale, over the layer you picked. The value will stay mostly intact, but the color slips right in. It's like tinting a black and white photograph. So you can pick any color you want and brush it in. You'll see instantly how the scene starts to come together. Slowly. In the beginning, you have to be very careful about the color scheme. So, of course, have some reference images prepared. And also remember, you don't always have to stay in color mode. If you want to adjust the value or make something pop, switch back to normal mode on your brush and just apply color directly like that. So this gives you more control, especially for highlights or deeper shadows. Try different hues, shift things around. If something doesn't work, undo or repaint it. Digital painting is really flexible, so take advantage of that. I'm starting with the background and moving towards the foreground. This usually gives me a cleaner color progression. Never hesitate to shift colors drastically if needed. Sometimes a bright yellow works better than a subtle green, or vice versa. Even if it feels too bold at first, let your eye guide some of your decisions. So for the middle ground shapes, I tried colder hues first. Eventually I found a nice balance that supported the mood. You can totally do the same. Turning the canvas to black and white occasionally helps you see if the value structure still holds up after adding color. If the values drift too much from your original sketch, you'll notice it right away. It's a simple check that keeps everything in line. Alright, now you can adjust the large background shapes. You can make them lighter and slightly cooler. This pushes them further away and strengthens the atmospheric depth. Atmosphere is one of your biggest tools for building a believable environment, and now it's time to figure out the ground plane. I'm testing different hues, orange, some green, yellow, before settling on something that fits the palette without overwhelming it too much. Consistency is key, so you want variation but not a lot of visual chaos. And actually now comes one of the fun parts, reflections. I'm grouping elements together and duplicating them. Then you can just flip them upside down and place them along the water surface. A quick motion blur gives them a soft, watery feel. It's a simple trick, but incredibly satisfying to watch. Make sure the reflected shapes are slightly darker, but of course that's depending on how murky the water is. So little touches like that make a huge difference. I'm gonna do the same for the fog layers to build more atmospheric depth. At this point, I'm thinking about consistency. So do we need more recurring shapes, more scale cues, more visual rhythms? I'm trying a few extra mushroom-like shapes in the foreground and adding slightly saturated orange hue to tie everything together. Strengthens the atmospheric depth. Atmosphere is one of your biggest tools for building a believable environment, and now it's time to figure out the ground plane. I'm testing different hues, orange, some green, yellow. Alright, now let's spend some time on our spaceman. He's part of a story, so he deserves some attention. I'm adding texture, some color accents, and a few quick design elements. It doesn't need to be overly detailed, just clear enough to fit within the environment. I'm also giving him a reflection on the water to anchor him in the scene. Them along the water surface. A quick motion blur gives them a soft, watery feel. It's a simple trick, but incredibly satisfying to watch. Make sure the reflected shapes are slightly darker, but of course that's depending on how murky the water is. So little touches like that. Now originally I planned to place a crashed spaceship in the right corner, but it competed too hard with the focal point, so instead I'm hinting at some debris, darker shapes that frame the scene without stealing too much attention. So that's always useful to adjust in case you're seeing it happen. Sometimes removing an object improves the overall composition more than adding one. I'm thinking that the world is still missing a little bit of texture and some detailing, so I'm adding roots extending into the water. They help break up large flat shapes and add more visual interest to the world. Try not to leave huge surfaces completely untouched. Even small details go a long way in making the world feel alive. These details also help define how the light works across the surfaces. The structure becomes clearer. And of course, think about your materials. It's really important for them to be easy to read, and the image will feel more cohesive. And also don't forget, because I did a couple of times, every element that sits near the water needs a reflection. It's kind of easy to overlook this, but reflections also really help sell the scene. Now let's revisit those flying alien birds. I'm giving them clear silhouettes and a bit of form. And then I'm duplicating them, adjusting their scale. You can push some of them deeper into the background if you want. This adds motion and life to the upper part of the image. It also gives you a subtle sense of how vast the world is. And sometimes removing an object improves the overall composition more than adding one. I'm thinking that the world is still missing a little bit of texture and some detailing. So I'm adding roots extending into the water. They help break up large flat shapes and add more visual interest to the world. Try not to leave huge surfaces completely untouched. Even small details go a long way in making the world feel alive. These details also help define how the light works across the surfaces. The structure becomes clear. And of course, think about your materials. It's really important for them to be easy to read. We are close to the finish line right now, so let's look at the final image. And again, if you're aiming to paint just like this, check out the program in the description. I refined the edges, added some variation to the silhouettes, and made sure the focal point stays clear and readable. Little adjustments go a long way here, so this stage is where the image really starts to feel more polished. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. I hope you enjoyed going through this process with me. If you did, please consider liking and subscribing. It genuinely helps a lot. I've got more tutorials coming soon, so stay tuned.